Father Briggs for another segment of Gospel Reflections. Let's begin. A reading from the Holy Gospel according to Luke. Raising his eyes towards his disciples, Jesus said, "Blessed are you who are poor, for the kingdom of God is yours. Blessed are you who are now hungry, for you will be satisfied. Blessed are you who are now weeping, for you will laugh. Blessed are you when people hate you, and when they exclude and insult you, and denounce your name as evil on account of the Son of Man. Rejoice and leap for joy on that day. Behold, your reward will be great in heaven. For their ancestors treated the prophets in the same way. But woe to you who are rich, for you have received your consolation. But woe to you who are now filled, for you will be hungry. Woe to you who laugh now, for you will grieve and weep. Woe to you when all speak well of you, for their ancestors treated the false prophets in this way." The Gospel of the Lord. So we of course have the Beatitudes that are being read today, but these are Luke's versions of the Beatitudes given in Luke 6. And the Beatitudes only appear in St. Matthew and St. Luke's Gospels. They're much longer in Matthew. There are 9 blessings and no corresponding woes. And in Luke's Gospel, there are only 4 blessings with 4 corresponding woes. There are also a little bit of contextual differences that we have. First of all, in Matthew's Gospel, these are given at the beginning of the Sermon on the Mount. What Matthew's doing there in these 3 chapters that make up this long discourse of Jesus is the longest time Jesus speaks in any of the Gospels is in Matthew's Sermon on the Mount. He sets Jesus up as a kind of new Moses who also received the tablets of the law on the mountain, on Sinai, right? Luke, in fact, does just the opposite. Jesus has come down from the mountain and he gives this sermon on the plain. We also have another contextual difference. Matthew, and this runs throughout his Beatitudes, but also throughout the Sermon on the Mount, Matthew's focus is really on this Jewish background of justice and righteousness and the new law that Jesus is inaugurating as the new Moses, whereas this context is fairly absent in Luke's Gospel and certainly absent in this part of it. Luke's intent is much more universal, and so we see this even from the very first Beatitude. Matthew says, "Blessed are the poor in spirit." He immediately spiritualizes the Beatitudes. Why? Because he's taking us from the letter of the law to the spirit of the law, right? Jesus throughout Matthew's Sermon on the Mount does this. I tell you, if you've even called your brother evil, you've committed murder in your heart, right? Jesus in Matthew's Gospel takes things to the extreme. Whereas here in Luke's Gospel, that spiritualization of the poor, of the downtrodden is absent. And he does this for a number of reasons. First, it puts in a universal ethical dimension out there that even the Greeks, even the Hellenistic world, which is probably the audience of St. Luke, they can understand these things. Moreover, Luke is that gospel which goes to the peripheries, as Pope Francis says so often. It instills in all of us this idea that we have both privilege and responsibility, and that we are called to go out to the actual poor as Jesus did. And indeed, instead of Matthew's golden rule, treating others as we would want to be treated, Luke goes almost a step further and says, treat as God would treat. Right? Big dimension there. And how does God treat? From the beginning of St. Luke's Gospel, he's going to reverse those conditions of the poor, right? In Mary's Magnificat, we see that the lowly will be exalted, and those sitting on thrones will be cast down. So there's this universal dimension here in Luke. This ties in really beautifully to the saint of the day. We celebrate St. Peter Claver, who is known as the Apostle of Cartagena. Cartagena, who is the patron saint of slaves. He was a 15th, 16th century saint, inspired ever since he's young to help the poor and downtrodden, these physical poor, right, that St. Luke talks about. And at age 29, he leaves his native Spain to Cartagena in Colombia, and he is just astounded there. Some 10,000 slaves would pass by each year in the port of Cartagena, and they came in such terrible conditions. As we know, the slave trade was just abhorrent, right? And when these slaves would come off naked from the ships, many of them were sick and ill, close to death. He knew, Peter Claver knew that he couldn't overturn the system of slavery, but he knew, in the lines of Mother Teresa, that he could do small deeds with great, great love. And so with his companions, with these 6 slaves who were laying on the mud, on the ground, in this foreign land after a long sea voyage, he would build up little mounds, cover the mounds with his own clothes, and lift them up there, so that if they did pass, they would have at least a little bit more comfortable spot off the ground. He would bathe their wounds. He would create little fires with smoke or spice packets, just to let them know that they were loved, that they had worth and human dignity. For those who he preached to by this example first, and if they were receptive to his example of Christian living, then he would begin with a very basic treatise of Christian doctrine, of the creed, and then with the more difficult precepts of the incarnation and the passion and the idea of the Most Holy Trinity, right? And then lastly, if they were willing, he would lead them in an act of contrition in their own language and baptize. And he baptized some hundreds of thousands of Black Africans who came over. We're inspired by his example. We're inspired to continue to overturn unjust institutions of our time. Slavery comes in many forms, in the form of addictions, in the form of human trafficking, right? We are reminded by both St. Luke and St. Peter Claver that it's our responsibility to show the love of God to our neighbor, wherever they may be, and we do this with great joy and with small acts of love in our day-to-day activities. God bless you all.